to Arts Ecologies. Very nice to see you all here. So this event is entitled Arts Ecologies, Climate Change in Theatre, Film and Media. We have got 4 guests here today. I'm really delighted. So we've got Kay Michael. I'll introduce them all properly in a moment. Kay Michael. We have Nick Johansen, and we have Rosalind Fowler and Marissia Fragkou. So what I thought we'd do, because there are quite a few speakers, is that each person can have 10 or 15 minutes sort of to themselves. We can dialogue with each person individually, and then we'll come together for more of a group discussion, and there'll be plenty of time for people to ask questions as well. And I think we are going to finish at about 7:30. Is that right? Yes, right. Okay. Just to introduce myself, my name is Clare Finburgh. I work here in the School of Arts, and I work on modern and contemporary British and more widely European theatre and performance. And more recently, I have moved into sort of 2 more political areas. One of them is looking at representations of conflict in theatre, and the other one is looking at eco-critical perspectives on theatre and performance. And with Carl Lavery, who is at the University of Glasgow, we brought out this book last year called Rethinking the Theatre of the Absurd. I have to read it, I never remember the title. Rethinking the Theatre of the Absurd, Ecology, the Environment and the Greening of the Modern Stage, where we looked at the absurdist writers of the 50s and 60s, for example, Beckett, Ionesco, Adamov and Genet, and also looking at more contemporary writers like Carol Churchill, and we looked at them from eco-critical perspectives, what they are saying about the ecological crisis that we are living, that we've been living in, most notably since after the Second World War. Okay, so that's me. So I thought we might start with Nick, if that's okay. So I'm just going to introduce Nick and then ask him a few questions, and Nick's welcome also just to show us what his current practice is. So Nick Johansen is an environmental scientist, which is really wonderful to have him here today because we've got a particularly interdisciplinary panel. And he's a landscape ecologist and director of the Kent Downs Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. So perhaps Nick could sort of tell us a bit more about what those involve in a moment. Nick notably seeks to bring environmental and landscape management together with arts and culture, so that's why it's particularly you're particularly welcome on this panel today. And 2 of the particular projects he's working on at the moment are the ASH project, and I believe that the School of Arts has been invited to take part in that project as well. And this seeks to secure an extraordinary and enduring cultural record of ash trees, especially in the Kent area. It's influenced also by the paintings of Samuel Palmer. So I just wondered, Nick, if you could talk about your involvement with environmental or ecological issues, and perhaps especially that sort of bringing together of environmental science and the arts.
Yeah, I can do that. Yes, of course. So my training is as a scientist, and originally as an environmental scientist. More latterly as a landscape ecologist. And that kind of where landscape and science comes together is where, landscapes, we live in this country in cultural landscapes, in most of Europe, in cultural landscapes. And there is a really close alliance between the science, the ecology of the landscape, and the place, the feeling, the beauty of the landscape. And my day job, my usual job, is all about trying to use what the legislation says about areas of outstanding natural beauty to conserve and enhance natural beauty. But natural beauty is a cultural thing, and it draws from hundreds, thousands of years of people interacting with place, people interpreting place, artists doing so, and arguably much of the English or British landscape movement has, and the appreciation of landscape has come from an art basis, of obviously often visual arts rather than theatre background, but not entirely, as your application shows.
Right, okay, I just wondered if I could bounce off that a little bit. Could you give us a bit more of an insight into what a landscape ecologist is? I personally am not sure.
Well, it was the title of the MSc.
Right.
So a landscape ecologist is, there's a few of us. What it does is it brings together the scientific understanding of landscape processes with the understanding of a concept which is landscape character. So landscapes are described by what makes them distinctive, what makes them special. Why is a landscape in Kent different from a landscape in Dorset or in southern France or anywhere else? What is distinct and what is particular? That's the idea of character. And obviously character derives part of what it is from the ecology, the biodiversity, the geology, the sort of the science bit. So they're interwoven in my view.
And you mentioned something that I think maybe Rosalind could also talk about a little bit later. This idea of landscape as being a kind of cultural construct, and the reason why I mentioned that is because you work a lot on the sort of the documentary and the fiction of where does nature lie in this kind of perceived dichotomy between, on the one hand, fiction and on the other hand, fact. And when you're talking about the landscape being something as a cultural construct, and you say it dates back thousands of years, I mean, we've got the tradition of pastoral literature, for example, pastoral poetry, and we've of course got the romantics, like Wordsworth, and a lot of our kind of notion of what landscape is derives from that, or in the US from Thoreau. So where today does, in a more kind of, in your capacity as an environmentalist and as someone who is a kind of custodian, I suppose, of what our landscapes are today, where does that cultural notion of landscape come from? What does it mean?
I think it means very different things to different people, and I think what we try to do in things like landscape character study is to try and provide clear descriptions and interpretation of what's special and distinctive. I think where art comes into this is that it can really help in that regard, and that's I think artists often see and interpret place and landscape in a different way to the geologists, the ecologists, and see with a different clarity and have a different perspective. And I think that's what is so compelling about trying to link landscape conservation, which is my job, with artistic and cultural expression, because I think that really helps. It helps engage people. I mean, I'm guessing that the language of landscape character assessment is already turning people off, and the science of that is sort of really quite difficult to get hold of. But God, these places really matter to people, and they love them. And so we kind of deconstruct through that way and try and, when a lot of my work's around planning and endlessly trying to explain why a proposal is at odds with the landscape that people value. And trying to sort of go underneath the idea of views and sort of really add many more layers to what landscape is all about.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us some examples of the projects that you have worked alongside, the artistic projects that you've
should I do a little? I don't know when you would like me to do that, because that kind of links to.
Yeah.
So that image, for instance, is from an artist that we have collaborated with. So maybe I'll just pop through those images.
Yes. Can everyone see all right, or do you need less light?
Yeah.
No, that's all right. Yeah, so if you'd like to talk us through the images.
Just take that, and that might set that context a little bit.
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
So this is an artist called Rob Kessler, who we work with on the route between on the cliffs between Dover and Folkestone in Kent. And Rob, he's an artist, but he works through Nesta he is supported often by Nesta, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. So it's that wonderful linking between arts and science. And what I was hoping to do was to try. I'm conscious that you're probably mostly interested in theatre, so in this, but maybe not. No. Okay. I thought the trees. I've used trees as actors, but make no reference to Birnham Wood apart from that one. So these are pollen grains from a tree, and this is what scientists see all of the time. This is a scanning electron microscope image of pollen grains, and whenever you see chalk broken down in a scanning electron microscope or pollen grains, they are the most extraordinarily beautiful things. But scientists are sitting in labs looking at this beauty, and it's rarely shared. People don't get it. But it took an artist, I think. Rob has done a huge amount of work. He's coloured them, he's enhanced them a bit, but they are such dramatic and extraordinarily beautiful images. And I think that brings the tree, the ecology, the science and the art together in one place. And as I said, we worked with Rob where he collected pollen grains from the flora of the coast of Kent. And if you walk along the cliffs between Dover and Folkestone, there's places where you can stop and listen to a poet through your mobile phone, and places where you can stop and do brass rubbings of scanning electron micrograph images of pollen grains of the plants that you're walking through. So I thought that was helpful as a connection. I also thought it would be helpful just to remind ourselves of the ecology thing, of where we are, and this great acceleration, and how much it matters that we get the issue of ecology across, and why we need so many routes to that, and why art, I think, is so important, because it can be so influential. And this is just a slide I pinched from another guy who works out of Kent now, but he's the former chair of UK Sustainable Development Commission. Before that was a guy called Wardell, before that was disbanded. But you can see just this extraordinary change over time. And we go back to the sort of the pastoral writing and Samuel Palmer, who was painting in Kent in the early 1800s, when very early, when things seemed settled. But now, that acceleration is just extraordinary. And another slide from Will, which is really quite scary stuff about how much change we need to see in the next period. So, the landscape I'm working with is a quarter of the county of Kent. It's a relatively small deal in the global perspective, but there are people like me doing this all around the world. There are protected landscapes all around the world with doing this kind of stuff. So I thought I'd just quickly go using trees as actors, talking a little bit about our work and connecting with art. This is Samuel Palmer, who's mentioned, painted famously in Kent, in West Kent, in the Darrant Valley, in a village called Shoreham, in the early 1800s. And he had money at this time. He soon ran out of it because no one got his art, and it became very much tighter and much less inspirational. This is the stuff people value most now. He was prolific when he lived for 10 years in Shoreham, and it was at a time when it felt like there was massive change in the environment, and Palmer reflected that in his work. And just south of Canterbury, in the Elam Valley, the swing riots were occurring in response to the mechanisation of agriculture and the loss of a rural idyll. So there's a resonance with what's happening now in this great acceleration, where an artist was motivated by that loss of landscape. And artists matter. You don't lock up people unless they can have influence. And I believe artists and art can have a massive influence for change and for influence, as I said. And Ai Weiwei used the tree as a symbol. And trees are extraordinarily important, a critical part of our landscapes. And here, he uses trees as a metaphor for China. He's taken bits of trees and pulled them together, and China as a nation has taken bits of China and pulled them together. But what I think is an interesting thing, but what I'm most interested in is the strength and the power of the image of the tree. And that links to our work on the Ash Project. Here's another strong and powerful image of a tree. This is an elm tree, and our landscapes, through globalisation, through the introduction of Dutch elm disease from North America, and I'm old enough to remember an elm landscape. They've gone. We have no elm landscapes left in Britain, apart from a little bit around Brighton. Here is every bit as stunning and beautiful, I think, as Isle of Wight tree, a Dutch elm. And then, a slight sideways look, another artist inspired by the landscapes near here, slightly tangential. This is made of elm, but Henry Moore lived at Kingston, again, just south of Canterbury, and worked in a tiny little cottage in that beautiful, gentle downland valley. And he wrote about the importance of that landscape in his movement to making large-scale outdoor pieces with these gentle rolling shapes. So there was a bit of a link to landscape and elm. But here's upright, bang up to date, as I drove here from our offices in the Kent Downs. There are lots of ash trees with no leaves on. And we are due to lose ash from our landscape in the same way that we lost elm. And when I heard that, as someone who's brought up in an elm landscape in East Anglia, it really got me. It was quite an emotional thing to think, here I am working in this landscape, which is dominated by elm. Kent is elm, ash is the most common tree in Kent, and they will go. They're going now, and it's most advanced here. So we wanted to run a project which is all about creating, through art, primarily through art and people engagement, an enduring record of ash in our landscape. And we can work with theatre, we can work with film, we can work with visual artists to try and, because we won't have these landscapes in the future, but if we can act together and work with artists, we can have some sort of record, which I hope would be extraordinary. So we're working with the artists who created this. We hope, if we get our art council bid, a practice called Ackroyd and Harvey. And I just read, this was something they did in Paris for the climate change talks. There was a whole series of art around the COP21, as it was called. And this, in their words, is a symbolic staged event at the Musée National d'Histoire Naturelle and the Jardin des Plantes in Paris during the opening week of the climate change talk, framing the tree as the actor in an urban drama of increasing city temperatures, damaging floodwaters, polluted air and biodiversity loss. An evergreen oak holds centre stage as impetus to green cities and towns worldwide. So it kind of hopefully shows why we chose those artists to work with us in the Ash Project and some of their other practice. And just 2 days ago, I've talked about one species, the ash in Kent, although we're losing it across the country, across all of Europe. And it's another globalisation thing. The ash dieback has come from the Far East, and there's no resistance in our trees, or not very much. Kew published this. The good news, 390,900 trees known to science. The bad news, 20% of them are at risk of extinction. So, again, there's a lot of science going on behind this. Governments understand this, but my view is that arts and culture can be an enormously powerful way to try and get this story across. So that's my background, which answers a little bit your question.
Yes. No, absolutely, yeah, thank you so much for that. This whole idea of using trees as actors and placing a trees centre stage, as opposed to humans, is, I think, enormously important. And I suppose a dilemma or a kind of paradox, how to make art. First of all, traditionally art places humans centre stage. If we think about theatre, and the Western tradition of theatre that comes from the ancient Greeks, we have human conflict. Ancient Greek drama comes from the notion, the word drama means conflict, and it's conflict between humans, or sometimes between humans and gods. But if we think of the names of the great plays, they're the names of humans. They're Oedipus or Medea or Antigone. And even coming up to the 20th century, it's just even with naturalist theatre, which has the word kind of nature in it, and which looked at how the environment affects humans. It was still the humans that were placed centre stage in the theatres of, for example, Ibsen and Chekhov up to a point. So I think what's really fascinating about, for example, the Ackroyd and Harvey piece that you've shown us is that we've got these theatrical curtains. We've got a theatre, haven't we? We've got a kind of subversion of theatre going on. This is a kind of theatre that we can see, which is potentially post-human, where we don't have human beings centre stage. So I'm just wondering about the kinds of pieces of art that you work with, or that you involved in commissioning, and how it's really about putting not putting humans right in the middle of the frame.
Well, interesting. I think humans are centre stage in what we do, and I see what we're, the real strength of working with artists and through art in what we try to do, the science and the landscape conservation, is that through art we can engage with people. So people are centre stage, and it's another line to understanding and appreciation, because as the chief exec of the Black Environment Network once said, she's great, she said, you have to start by getting people to love the environment, and you protect what you love, and that's where art can help. We can bang on about the loss of biodiversity, all of this stuff in our relatively dry language, but if that can be picked up and understood, and interestingly, probably most powerful where the science is really strongly underpinning, so it's kind of telling a true story, then I think that's another way to get that message across. So it's communication. So humans, I think, are centre stage because we stand to lose the most, and we are the ones who can affect change.
Thank you. So Nick, we're going to move on to the next person. But if you've got questions, please do hold on to them, and there'll be plenty of time for them. And also, if other participants, other guests have got questions for each other, that would be wonderful. We could have a sort of discussion afterwards. So if we can move on to Rosalind Fowler.
So,
I was just going to introduce you, Rosalind.
Oh, right.
Okay. No, you can busy away. But so Rosalind is an artist and a filmmaker, and her work in particular explores the politics of poetics and of place, especially in the context of the English landscape. And Rosalind experiments with the potential of documentary and fiction filmmaking to investigate the boundaries between the real and imagined, the visible and the invisible. And she's recently completed an artist residency at the William Morris Gallery, which is the one in Walthamstow.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. So, did you want to start with some pictures?
Yeah, I'm just going to leave those rolling in the background while I talk. Yeah, thank you. The thing that I was mainly going to kind of talk about today was my recent artist residency, because I think in terms of the themes of this discussion, my work's, over the last few years I've been very interested in relationships to place and landscape, but I think this particular project that I did at the William Morris Gallery is probably sort of the most relevant. So for that residency, basically, I was interested in sort of similarities and resonances between William Morris's utopian or ecotopian visions for a future London and actually what's going on in the borough of Waltham Forest today. So there's a very active kind of culture of food growing and different sites that are spread out through the borough. So they're quite sort of pioneering relative to the rest of London. I'd say they're one of the most sort of important boroughs for that. And I'm particularly interested, I was a gardener as well as being an artist. I've been a volunteer gardener and done various gardening courses at this place Organically, which is a 12-acre food growing cooperative on the edge of Epping Forest. And so for this residency, like I said, I sort of saw interesting resonances, kind of overlapping themes between William Morris's ideas. You know, he was writing in an industrial, heavily polluted London, and he was sort of dreaming of a future London where there would be a local food economy, a sensuous connection to nature through work, more sort of definitely environmentalists have kind of picked up on William Morris's ideas, but I wanted to sort of look, I don't want to look at them kind of romantically, I wanted to sort of look at them critically and sort of. So in terms of practically what I did, I also was really interested in sort of the methods through which I made the work, so I wanted to kind of looking at these ecological ideas, embodying some of those ideas through the work. So I set up a yurt, and I basically transformed that into a film lab, and I hand processed, so I used a wind-up camera, and I hand processed 16mm film in this dark room, and I used ecological methods. So basically I hand processed 16mm film using a formula of coffee grains with vitamin C and soda crystals, and I had no electricity. I used water collected in a water butt, and I experimented with sort of hand dyeing film using natural plant dyes, and I composted film, and so those actual methods were kind of, I think as well as looking at ideas surrounding the environment and food growing, I wanted to kind of think about my own practice and how I might make that more ecological. And Organically themselves are sort of very committed. They're a cooperative, and they're very, very committed to kind of the politics of food growing and transforming the local food economy. And so the work that that I'm continuing to make, I've got a show at the gallery in the autumn, and also hopefully an installation at the Barber as well, and shown at Somerset House, because there's a big year-long Utopia season there as well. And actually the exciting thing about the Barber thing, and this is sort of, I guess, one of the things I want to say about my work is it's sort of, it's a critical form of engagement, but also I see it as a kind of form of activism with potential for kind of, real projects to then grow out of that within different social groups, so quite sort of socially embedded work. But in terms of the actual work, I haven't told you what I'm sort of making. So it's partly kind of a portrait of this place, a filmic portrait. So I've used hand-processed, I'm not really referring, that's composted film. So it's partly a filmic portrait of this place and this community growing through the seasons. But I also wanted to use that place as a sort of space for dreaming about and thinking through ideas about ecotopia and utopia. And in the same way that William Morris's protagonist, William Guest, in the novel News from Nowhere, falls asleep and wakes up in this imaginary future London, I invited gardeners on the growing site to kind of do the same thing, to imagine they fell asleep and woke up in a future London, so looking from the vantage point of today and how they envisage or what their dreams for an imaginary future London would be. And so part of that is through voice work, but also I started this seed packet project, and this is an ongoing thing actually, where I'm getting gardeners around the borough to basically get their empty seed packets once they've kind of got them on their allotments or wherever they are, and to open them out and write on them their sort of either write or draw their sort of dreams or visions for their imaginary future London. So it's kind of trying to build up these shared dreams and visions for a future London, and you know, I see it as very much somewhere between the real and the imagined, and the space for you know, using the imaginary and ideas about utopia to also somehow becoming a starting point for kind of thinking about change. And actually the Barbican, for example, are interested, they want through this work to set up a growing project, for me to kind of curate and set up a growing project with Barbican residents, you know, which hopefully is going to happen. But again, that's an example of how there's this sort of interplay between, you know, the work and then a real life kind of you know, organisation that are kind of trying to make change at a grassroots level, and how sort of art and kind of real life might interconnect through that. Does that explain it?
Yeah, no, completely, absolutely.
And I got gardeners to do sort of readings from News from Nowhere as well, and but they're real. It's a real social. It's a very mixed kind of this. Organically, it's like an amazing place because it brings together so many different people from different backgrounds, and a lot of people who might be out of work or struggling to get work, or people with mental health problems all come there and garden. So it's kind of, yeah, it's a really quite an inspiring place actually. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's given a really amazing insight into the project that you're working on, and I'm really reminded of Félix Guattari, I don't know if you're aware of his book, The Three Ecologies, where he talks specifically about these three interweaving ecologies of the personal and the community and the environment, and it seems to me that all three of these are interpenetrating and equally sort of reciprocal and mutually supporting in the project that you're working on, in that it's something that's therapeutic for the individual, potentially, and you talk about the kind of sensuous relationship with the earth, and it's something also that has an awareness, an environmental awareness towards community, and creating a community out of gardening. And then finally, there's the awareness of the potential harm that can be done to the environment, and how that might be able to be combated even through your own artistic practices. Yeah, so it really definitely resonated with this idea of these three ecologies.
And William Morris in News from Nowhere also talks about exactly that. He sort of there was a quote somewhere about that, and that, you know, the biggest problem that he saw, or his protagonist talks about, is this separation between, you know, man and nature, and this sort of misconception that they are somehow separate, you know, nature, animate, but actually, yeah, they're one. But within that, and within sort of the project, yeah, you still have to find points of criticism. You know, of course, there's still kind of, you know, there's always some questions about what's the relationship between the artist and the community, and that, you know, and those are all the things you have to kind of work through, navigate your way through as you go along as well, I think. But yeah, no, it was an interesting project for sure.
I just wondered about, because you've talked about various institutions that you've been involved with. So you've been involved with the William Morris House. Sorry?
Gallery, yeah.
Oh, the gallery,
Yeah,
sorry, William
okay.
Morris Gallery. And also potentially with the Barbican, and I don't know what kind of involvement you've had with the Arts Council of England, but I just wondered what support or what interest you felt that there was from those institutions for projects where art is turning its attention towards ecological issues.
I mean, I think, you know, you'll have seen it in recent years, like gardening, the whole kind of, this sort of theme seems to be quite sort of popular in the arts, and you know, that's just coincidence from my point of view, because this is something I've been interested in for a long time. But I think that there is, you know, I think one of the reasons the gallery was quite interested is it sort of engaged, you know, the gardening community within the borough, and that sort of, you know, people are more and more interested in gardening, food growing, you know, local food economies. So in that way. But yes, okay, so yeah, in terms of, so the Arts Council, well, I'll let you know, because I'm submitting an Arts Council application at the moment this week, so for kind of further funding to finish this project. So it's hard for me to say sort of in general where that fits in their sort of priorities. But certainly the gallery, the Barbican, have been very receptive, and I think it's sort of chimed with some of their own interests. And I mean, also this Utopia year, and for example at Sunset House, as part of their Utopia year, which primarily looks at, celebrates the 500-year anniversary of Sir Thomas More's publication of his Utopia. There is going to be an edible Utopia strand within that, and so that's why they're inviting me. So it's very topical, I guess. It's come up, and then the Barbican are particularly interested because some of my ideas then link with the origins of the construction of the Barbican and their utopian kind of, and some of that was sort of environmental and to do with sustainability. So they kind of built all the walkways high above the ground, so to prioritise pedestrian, experience over kind of the cars, which should be further away. And then also, for example, as part of their contracts, Barbican, when Barbican was constructed, initially early residents had to, as part of their contract, had to have a growing box on their balcony. So, and I'm trying to now, they're interested in having my work there, and then linking back in again, and sort of somehow linking with that history. So it's sort of, and it's just all been a happy coincidence for me. But so it does seem to be there is interest.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for talking us through that really fascinating work that I'm really looking forward to seeing at the Barbican as well. So if we move on to Kay Michael, so just by way of a little introduction, Kay is a freelance theatre director, and she's the artistic director of Empty Deck Theatre Company. Did you found Empty Deck? Oh, that she founded. And Empty Deck often collaborate with contemporary international playwrights. So, for example, at the moment, she is working on a text by Danish playwright Christian Lolika, and it's called Cosmic Fear, or The Day Brad Pitt Got Paranoia. And this is in association with the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research. So, Kate, could you just maybe start off by telling us about that particular project?
Yeah. So we're currently in pre-production, about to launch into rehearsals. So Cosmic Fear, The Day Brad Pitt Got Paranoia is, well, in fact, maybe I should start by reading the very opening sequence, because I think that will give you an idea of exactly what this is, and then that could be a good springboard to talk from. Okay, here goes. It's better than visual representation I don't yet have. So, three characters. A, B, and C could be three people in an apartment. Three people who know that the world is about to go under, and who, in spite of that fact, feel slightly paralysed. Three people who decide to examine their paralysis. A, B, and C could be three people who have to invent a hero in order to talk about or understand their paralysis. B, the resources are not inexhaustible. The ozone layer is collapsing. The world is overpopulated. The ice is actually melting, and there's not one person who doesn't know this. And so what are we supposed to do? Join an organisation and sit with a group of hand-knit sweaters who think that if we just turn the heat down a little bit, or buy organic food, hand out leaflets and talk nicely to each other, then C? Or should we join the more radical protesters and cling to the side of a cargo ship waving a banner? Should we kidnap the weather girl, the one who always looks so happy when she's telling us what a great day it's going to be? Should we kidnap her as part of an operation called Green Terror, aiming to raise people's consciousness to what they already know? A, kiss me. B, we could also join one of the Green parties and fight alongside the comrades for the right to say things as they are. A, kiss me. B, we're dying. And it's the rich people's fault, because we're the ones who pollute the most, because we have the biggest houses, we buy the most airline tickets, and we own the majority of shares in the wrong companies. And they're the same companies who are telling us what they want, that they want us to make things greener. That they very much want to do so, as long as they don't have to pay for it, and everyone understands that, and so does the government. C, it does when it learns when the jobs, it does when it learns where the jobs are moving to, unless they, A, picks up the microphone and addresses the audience. And all I want to do is creep deep, deep into his dreams, deep into the soul he doesn't think he has. I just want to be inside and repeat the same words over and over again. C, and then I can take part in local politics and interpret the world in a tactical and intelligent way so that I don't scare the voters away. Yes, because I have to control my temper and try to hide how deeply I hate the person sitting across the table lying to me as he statistically proves that he is right, that buying and selling of CO2 quotas actually works. A picks up the microphone again and addresses the audience. And when he holds me tight, I almost start to cry. And I know that he's the one who is sad, but I'm the one crying. I don't know if it's because my dad's an alcoholic or if I'm just suffering from the world's most self-effacing Florence Nightingale complex, but it doesn't matter, because in those seconds when he holds me so tight, those are the seconds when I know that I exist. B, and then she holds me with her organic hands, because she does all her shopping in the right places. Yeah, she's very much into that, and not to mention she can afford it, but I don't think about that, or I do, but at the same time, I'm just standing there, falling apart. A, I love you, even when you're self-obsessed, dragging your sarcasm like a cross. B, I know you're fucking tired of me, and I understand it. I'm fucking tired of myself too, but I'm stuck with my cynicism, my pessimism, and my self-contempt, and I can't see how I can bring myself to safety on the island you call hope, because it's a long way away, and I'm far out and have long since forgotten how to swim, and I thank you for the life jacket, and I know that there are people who are feeling worse than me, and if you want to throw me overboard, then I understand, because I'm weighing you down, am I not? A, I'm turned on by your hopelessness and your presence, so threatening and urgent that it fills me with the painful longing of having you inside me. A and B start kissing. C, what do we do now? B, save planet Earth. C, what? B, yes. A, O. B, okay, I'm Brad Pitt and I'm a man of action. That's why I'm sitting in front of my producer right now saying we have to make something important. Something that's not just entertaining, but changing, altering, something that makes a difference. So there we go. The opening of quite a bombastic and chaotic play about three characters' feeling of paralysis in the face of climate change and not knowing what to do about it. And so what then ensues is they grab onto this imagined scenario where they take on the persona of Brad Pitt. In fact, nowadays it would be Leonardo DiCaprio.
I was thinking,
Yeah, we did have permission. Yeah, we have had permission to change the title to actually fit that. But I think that Brad Pitt sums up this man of action and heroism in a way that Leonardo DiCaprio is a bit romantic in the sound of the name, simply. So three characters imagining themselves to be the ultimate Hollywood hero that the whole world loves. And if he was to make a film that could change global consciousness, to transform the world and save planet Earth, then what would that narrative be? And so these three characters, these three flatmates, embarking on that imaginary problem as almost a way of distracting themselves from knowing what to do to engage with climate change in a positive way. So this play, in many ways, and we've been working with the Tyndall Centre, which is Centre for Climate Change Research, and through a lot of their research have discovered that the majority of the general public in Great Britain at least accept that climate change is an issue, but yet don't know or don't feel able to deal with it, or don't know what can be done from a personal perspective to tackle it. And this play very much sums up that feeling of paralysis or paranoia. And so the task that Empty Deck has set itself with putting on this production is not only do we want to put on this show as an expression of that, but find a way to bridge the gap between this fictive dramatic space, and the reality that is all around us, that climate change is an issue to be dealing with, and to find a bridge for the audience in offering solutions is not the right word, but offering different avenues of exploration for their own lives in practices of sustainable living. So we're working with the Tyndall Centre to enable conversations around this show, so that the audience can, as much as just experience watching this expression of paralysis and paranoia and the difficulty of imagining what is such a huge existential threat and knowing what to do with it, not knowing how to deal with it. So holding post-show conversations for people to really discuss and reframe, or to acknowledge what their framing is of climate change, and what maladaptive behaviours we each have in looking at this existential threat. And then providing workshops or spaces where people can discuss together or share skills in sustainable or environmental practices or living, as an opportunity to provide tactics or active choices in engaging with this topic in a more positive frame. So that's the task really. And so in taking this show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, we're turning our theatre space into a site of activity. So not only is it about putting on the show, but it's about the countertext to that in the workshops and the conversations, and the potential in leaving a legacy beyond taking a show to one site, but building a local community of people that are in Edinburgh, as well as the audiences that arrive and travel from all over the world to Edinburgh, but the ability to leave a legacy also within an online platform where skills can be shared and conversations can continue around the positive reframing of climate change and how individuals can respond and interact with this topic.
So I was going to ask you
Yeah.
the question that is asked in the text,
Yeah.
as in how do we sort of move beyond just entertaining an audience and actually engage them in some kind of change? And I presume you've just answered how you've responded to how you might answer that question with respect to your own staging of the play.
In terms of we're calling it the countertext, really, the outreach programme surrounding the production. But do you mean in terms of the performative stage, the production itself?
Well, perhaps, actually. I mean, I think that for me, you sort of responded to that question in that you do have these debates and you have the online forums and things. But yeah, is there anything in the actual staging of the play itself which you feel for you moves beyond mere entertainment into something that might, provoke thought and provoke some kind of engagement?
Yeah. I mean, as you can hear, it's an incredibly, it's almost like a stream of consciousness of back and forth of confusion, fears and paranoia, and I think that those characters are the vessels for a lot of what this production will do. We are wanting to really involve the audience with the very questions that the characters are asking themselves of what can we do in the face of this, and so the potential for the audience to have an interactive engagement with the theatrical set itself, so actually putting up their own this is still kind of a framing that myself and my designer are kind of cementing, but an opportunity for audiences to either write their immediate responses to their experience of the play on the set. So there's an accumulation of thought and feeling in response to the discourse of the play that will continue to live in this production.
And just, thank you, and just moving on from what Rosalind was talking about, her practice of using this kind of biodegradable or ecologically friendly products for developing film, like soda crystals and citric acid and what's the other? Coffee grounds. And I'm just thinking about Duncan Macmillan's play after that was done at the Schaubühne, where the electricity for the production actually came from bikes. This was Chloe Lamford's design and Katie Mitchell's production. And I just wondered if there was sort of environmental elements to your staging and how feasible that is in theatre, because theatre by definition is something that is ephemeral and where, you know, it gets chucked in the bin, a lot of it, and so, well, or recycled or whatever. And I just wondered if you know, how feasible that sort of technology or that sort of approach was, because obviously, you know, the Schaubühne does have huge means.
Yeah. It's a big question because there's so many elements to theatre production. I mean, if you think about stage lights, the amount of power that they use, there's a whole range of, in particular, LED lights use a lot less power. So tick that box. But it's absolutely possible to create a stage design that is either from reclaimed materials or often with my designer we like to work with one material, so we're in a conversation at the moment of just working with cardboard and cardboard boxes to create the impression of this flat. But I mean, in theatre you learn to make work on a shoestring, and that's part of what interests us as well, in terms of, you know, we want to keep the carbon footprint as low as possible, so we're aware of our own hypocrisies perhaps in what we present, if we go in with huge production values and huge carbon footprint and the amount of power that we might use. I think it is absolutely achievable. I think theatre, you can do theatre without anything other than the performance, if you so choose to.
And then my final question is, it strikes me that in theatre at the moment there are a couple of different tendencies. I'm not really sure about I don't know, in film or in visual art, but it strikes me that in theatre there are two tendencies in terms of kind of ecological performance in this country at the moment, or several tendencies, but there seems to be one. There are plays like Simon Stevens's Water, or there are Steve Waters' plays, where we have a more explicit discussion of environmental issues, perhaps a little bit like what you've, you know, this opening to the play that you have talked about here. And then on the other hand, we have these kind of, I guess, these plays on the brink of an apocalypse, and you mentioned something about that as well. I'm just thinking of Alistair McDowell's quite staggering play X. I don't know if anyone saw it, it was on at the Royal Court very recently. Or Carol Churchill's Escaped Alone, these plays where we're on the brink of an apocalypse of some kind, and where, in a way, the disaster has already happened, and we're seeing we're seeing what devastation has been wrought by human human kind of maltreatment of the planet. And so I just wondered where, because it struck me that there were kind of perhaps these two tendencies somewhere in this play, and I just wondered where it sort of sat, if we could see that as some kind of dichotomy. On the one hand, as you know, we're in this position now, what shall we do? What are the environmental practices that we can change? And then this other tendency in theatre that I see at the moment of these plays where we're already in the middle of the devastation.
Yeah, that sounds like that. In both instances, they are in the middle of devastation.
Right.
So the dichotomy being either the devastation is about to come or it's already happened. I think that's what's. I mean, when we think about reality, and a lot of from what you've written actually, that we don't know where we're heading as human beings, and that's the existential threat that is so huge and that this play really captures. We can't determine, and even with the knowledge of climate change and what it is doing to the world as we speak, I think yesterday there was a report of 5 Pacific islands have already disappeared, but we just can't really imagine what the future will be and what it will look like. It's really hard for the imagination to hold on to that. I mean, even with the disappearance of these trees, I had no idea that was happening, but what will 100, 200 years look like? And I don't know if this is answering your question, but I think theatre is fascinated with this at the moment because it is just really difficult for the imagination to hold on to, and for human beings to know what to do in that situation. Even now, when we know that this might be the future, how do we live now seems to be the question. And that's certainly my own personal question at the moment. I mean, how do we live now, and knowing where we're heading, but we don't quite know the extent of destruction that might be without, framing it within a very dooming apocalyptic frame, because that can stop you from positively reacting or enacting.
Okay, thank you on that slightly positive, slightly buoyant note. Marissia, thank you for your patience. So finally we'll move on to Marissia, and then of course we'll come back to the other speakers. So Marissia is a colleague from Canterbury, Christchurch, just down the road, senior lecturer in performing arts, and her work focuses notably on the ethics of responsibility in radical democratic politics in contemporary British and European theatre. And she's working at the moment on a monograph called Ecologies of Precarity in 21st Century Theatre, Politics, Affect and Responsibility. So I just wondered if you could start off actually by giving us a little bit of an insight into these ecologies of precarity in 20th century theatre. And I sort of presume from the title that this isn't necessarily only environmental precarity, but perhaps economic precarity as well. But what part does ecology, as in an environmental ecology, play in this current research project?
Just to say thank you for inviting me, and I think hearing everyone's contributions, it's very interesting to hear about text-based projects, more visual art, and projects that also intersect with science. And I think this is quite crucial to work across disciplines. And there's a lot of talk and conferences and events that actually bring this into dialogue. I mean, my project is more sort of tries to bring these critical discourses together, but again, I'm the observer, I'm the person who writes about what is made. So to answer your question, Claire, yes, I mean, my approach to ecology is very much about the intersection across different experiences of precarity, so experiences of uncertainty in the contemporary, and the ecological or environmental precarities, practically a chapter in the book, but also it looks at how this interconnects with other risks in terms of children, and how children are represented on stage, in terms of ecologies of dispossession and austerity, ecology of displacement. So I look at the word ecology as an intersection of different risks, to put it bluntly, or different ecosystems really. And all these obviously interconnect anyway. You've just mentioned that these Pacific islands have disappeared. This has caused displacement of people who have to migrate. So it's very important, I think, to look at these as at the larger kind of frame as well. And I think ecological sort of art should be also sensitive to these issues. I organised a conference last year that also Paul was there. We invited a lot of people to talk about their own practice in ecological terms, and they were actually saying that my practice also talks about justice. It's very much about looking at the world at large and how environmental risk is embedded within those other risks. What my approach is really that kind of tallies with what I call ecology or ecosystem is my interest in affect. And everyone has already spoken about how we effectively engage with the environment. And for me, affect is very much a combination between energy and matter, using a lot of sort of feminist theory that talks about how objects or the world makes an impression on our bodies, on our perception. So I'm very much interested in how art and theatre in particular can also mark these, or make an impression on the spectator or the audience who is a participant. And also, I mean, what I found interesting is, just to pick on the point that Kay made, what are the representation practices that can best sort of communicate these risks to an audience and elicit action? I mean, the idea of slow violence that crops up in science as well. How can we represent, how can we communicate this idea of the earth slowly changing when we're used to the spectacular violence? You know, this is how we respond to spectacular violence, and this is how we kind of urge to act. And when you can't see it, where does the action come? Actually, your project, gardening, and the whole idea of the visibility is quite interesting. How can art communicate what lies beyond the visible, and communicate it in a way that is not palpable in the way that we have learned to appreciate the human or to read the human. So I'm interested in all these things. Hopefully, it will make sense in the context of the book. Yes, so I'm looking at performances that have taken place in the 21st century, but I think I'm also very sensitive, and I think that we should all be very sensitive about the histories. Like in your book, you've very beautifully explored that, how there's a lot of history of risk kind of represented in art, and we should engage with those histories as well. Not only in art, in general, across different contexts like colonialism, militarism, and how all these different ecosystems come together.
Okay, thank you. So I just had a question, I suppose, about the particular works that you're looking at in that chapter, and I suppose the aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned my book, our book, and I suppose the premise of the book, which revisited the theatre of the absurd, was to look at, for example, a playwright like Samuel Beckett, who is often perceived in perhaps existential terms as depicting these individuals who are lost after a kind of breakdown of grand religious or political discourses, or perhaps the plays are also looked at in a historical context as taking place after 2 world wars, mass genocide, etc. And what we wanted to do with this book is look at artists, writers like Beckett, in an environmental context. I mean, we have so many images in Beckett. For example, this single tree in Waiting for Godot, or this mound of poisoned ground in Happy Days, or in Endgame we've got everything that's wound down to zero, and we've got this kind of post-apocalyptic scene outside the windows. And we wanted to argue in this book that these are not a direct discussion of environmental issues, as you've shown us in the play that you read, but instead looking at ecological devastation through affect, or through rhythms, or through images, as opposed to through a kind of pedagogical discourse. So sort of within that framework of reading, I suppose, an aesthetics of ecology in a way. I just wondered which work, what kind of 21st century works you were looking at. Oh, we have examples.
Just to illustrate, I mean, just really basic photos, but just to show a few examples of text-based and non-text-based work that I find useful for my own sort of framework, but I think it's useful for the discussion. So on the post-apocalyptic ground that you just mentioned, yes, absolutely, I agree with Alistair McDowell's Exit, the Royal Court was a really brilliant play that really captures a lot of risks that we experience today in the future. This play also by Carol Churchill, who again a very well-known playwright of the British stage. She wrote this in 2000. It's called Far Away, and it's very much about imagining a world, imagining the unimaginable. So what might happen if animals and humans are at war? This is how the third act really, what the third act represents, and it starts very from a very different premise. But this is the ultimate sort of call to imagination. What do we do with intraspecies violence? And of course, it's a very bleak sort of question to the audience. But this is a very interesting example for me to think about ecologies of risk, not only on the environmental level, but also on other levels like humans and animals. Another example that
there are arrows in the top right-hand corner, I think.
Oh yeah, right. Sorry, I missed the arrows. Another piece of theatre that was a very recent one that was staged at the Barber, that again used technology and binaural technology in order to try to evoke or to represent the wild on the stage of the Barber. So represent the Amazonian jungle was Samuel McBurney's The Encounter, which also talked about this encounter of the human and the beyond the human, really, going back into this the story of the National Geographic photographer who visited the Amazonian jungle and met this tribe who lived, who actually were defending the Amazon and the proponents of activists against climate change. So again, this is another way of sort of addressing these issues to a wider audience. Again, this was also broadcasted live, so thousands of people watched it and experienced it from headphones. So we had to wear headphones even at home, and we could hear Samuel McBurney kind of speaking to us binaurally. So that was an interesting experiment, I think, of a new experiment in theatre that also engages people from the comfort of their houses, really, and asks you to imagine through the sense of listening how it feels to be perhaps in the jungle on the brink of collapse. I'm just whizzing through these, and if you want, we can sort of talk about these later. Another example is, I'm sorry, I just went to the end, I think. Yeah, this goes to the end, that's right.
What is it?
Yeah.
So, what about these ones here?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, does that work?
That's an hour.
Yeah. So you can just use these arrows here.
Another example of a non-text-based work, perhaps, is the Weather Project, which took place in Wales, where it was a collaboration between David Harradine and Finburgh, which is a theatre company, British theatre company, and they collaborated with the National Theatre Wales. And this is where they turned this house into, well, they brought the weather in this house, and each room had a different weather system, so they recreated a different weather system that the audience could experience. So you can see there is moss, there is damp, there was a room with light, which represented the sun. And I think his premise actually was, we're going to talk about the weather, or try to represent the weather, because everyone's talking about the weather, and this is what brings us together. So it's an interesting way of sort of engaging the audience in that. So again, another way of approaching how we relate to nature and the environment. And this reminds me, actually, this way of approaching these questions remind me of what Pascal says about we need to look at how we are performed by the environment as well, because we're part of it. So how, and he uses this metaphor of the wave, the surfer on the wave, and how, you know, you're carried away from this. So this is perhaps a way of allowing the audience to be performed by the actual ecosystem which exists in this house, or ecosystems. Another project that is not a theatre project so much, but it's done by a theatre company that I'm looking at is called Of All the People in All the World. You might have come across it. It's an ongoing project since 2003, and it's still on. It's still touring by a theatre company that stands CAF. This is where they take amounts of rice. One rice represents one human being, and they try to represent statistics about population growth, about anything that relates to the locale where the project is staged. And they create different dramaturgies in the space, so it's not fixed. The stories that are communicated every time are not really fixed. So what is interesting about this rice, and actually this rice, when they use it, then they wash it and they resell it for animal food, so it's not wasted. It looks like this is too much of a waste, but actually it's not. They are quite ethical about this. Actually, the interest here, in terms of the ecologies created in the space, is also the narratives that emerge. So you have the world's billionaires next to the world's refugees, for example, and then you make a connection as you pass through. And also, I think what is important here is that this project asks you to imagine the non-anthropocentric sort of a non-anthropocentric way of who we are. So the human is a grain of rice. We are grains of rice, and we can be everywhere in the space. We are not on one pile specifically. So it really asks us to imagine something beyond anthropomorphism or beyond the human as we know it. But it is about the human again. It is about ecologist risk. So these are some examples that I've used, or I'm using currently in this chapter, and I think they kind of represent different strands of work. So both, as I said, text-based and not text-based. I'm not really, there is this tendency to say, you know, text-based work cannot really talk about or communicate environmental issues. We need more immersive theatre to do that. Or, you know, it's a false divide, I think. It's a moot sort of debate. It really depends how the work is sensitive to certain issues and how it is made. So that's why I think it's important to have kind of both styles, or a range of practitioners and practices. So I'm just going to sit down.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to, I think, kind of perhaps bounce off one or two of the ideas that you have presented to us very beautifully. Thank you so much for that. To sort of pose questions, perhaps to open it out a little bit. And you mentioned the idea of anthropocentrism, and I suppose this is something that I would like to talk about perhaps a little bit more. And I mentioned before that theatre in a way is seen as the kind of human art par excellence, and one German theatre theorist, Erika Fischer-Lichter, she talks about, she says the fundamental theatrical situation always symbolises the conditio humana, so it's always the human, again, this idea of the human being placed centre stage. And I agree with you that it sort of depends how that's done. I mean, coming back to these absurdist writers like Beckett or like Ionesco, they might be humans, but they're very, they're certainly not humans who are in control, necessarily. I'm just coming back to the encounter and Simon McBurney, because on the one hand, this is about his encounter with the Amazon and about the Amazonians. On the other hand, it's all about Simon McBurney, as far as I could. That was my, this was about
a great white European middle class, middle-aged actor doing his bit for two and a half hours on the Barber stage. And I just wonder, but I think responding in my head to that, you made, I think, Nick, an important point that of course humans are central to all of this, because we're the only people who can do something about it and to stop it, to stop the crisis that we're in at the moment. So I just wondered about that question about, you know, anthropocentrism or anti-anthropocentrism, the human, the post-human, the non-human. What do we do with humans?
It struck me, it would be amazing to see a play that doesn't have any humans in it. Well, what would that be?
Robots.
And does robots, or is there a way?
Which Castellucci has done, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, The Rite of Spring.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and really quite an incredible, quite an environmental piece that was only with robots.
But even without robots, if it was just nature, because I love this idea of the tree being the actor, but you know, the framing of that, but really seeing it as it exists now. But how do you tell the story of nature without us placing our subjective imaginings onto it, or you know, I don't know what the answer is, but it's an interesting provocation.
I just wondered, Rosalind, if you had anything to say in that respect, because it strikes me that in the work that you do, yes, humans are making it and they're part of it, but they're very much part of a wider ecology, which is just as important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that, like, just when you're talking about, like, the, you know, sort of what relation should humans have to the environment, and I think if you completely kind of take humans out, you know, in a way, I feel like we have we have responsibility as well. So by completely decentering, you know, maybe we sort of somehow, you know, renege ourselves of responsibility as well. And actually, what maybe we should be doing is sort of actively thinking about, you know, citizenship and community relationship, however problematic those terms like community are, but sort of how we might actively engage. And yeah, so very much about sort of the interplay, I guess, between people and nature. I mean, I think also I sort of, because the environment and all those issues are can be so depressing in a way, I think I've sort of almost chosen recently to take a more positive relationship to that. So just start at a very grassroots level and make work on a really small scale in relation to kind of my local, you know, the place where I go and garden, rather than sort of think too big, which just feels very overwhelming in many ways. Yeah.
That's the overwhelming nature of the issue. That's why it's so hard to grasp.
I mean, I think you can offset, you know, authoritarian perspectives towards, you know, nature and representations of nature and landscape through the way that you make the work. So, you know, so as a film, it might be sort of more, you know, a voiceover. You know, you avoid kind of a documentary male voiceover. You know, you'd aspire to make something that's more tentative and fragmented, and you know, those kind of things, I guess, in the way that you might represent nature or relationships to nature.
Early on in my career, I came across Chris Plattman, who was the Environment Secretary, and he wrote in the then, I guess, Thatcher government, an extraordinary environment strategy, which started that the environment was important in its own right. You don't hear that much anymore. So in terms of humans at centre stage, it's all about, I mean, there's extraordinary languages developing around the importance of the environment and ecosystem services and natural capital, which is all sort of playing to the current, you know, environment of importance of growth and jobs and it's just a reflection that it actually isn't that long ago that, you know, a government was talking about the environment being important in its own right, and we have moved, it appears to me, moved miles from there, and the people advocating us, who are advocating the environment, are doing it really strongly now in capital terms. You know, we're trying to argue with very few voices saying any more that it's important in its own right. And actually, your idea of a play without people is kind of nature important in its own right. But yeah, I mean, yes, let's do that. I'll provide the truth.
Yeah.
There's a reflection that we have moved in that very short period of time, 25 years, from that kind of language, from probably an unexpected source, to the language of natural capital coming from the environment source, which is substantive change.
Fear because we're depleting those resources. We now, we can't be taking from the planet in the way that we have been. Is that
well, it is. It's trying to,
changing?
Yeah, and it's trying to adopt a common language, I suppose, and so it can be persuasive. You know, because natural capital arguments basically says what is very obvious that without this form of capital, is really important, all the other capital values are at serious risk. So that's kind of, I guess, the idea of natural capital and ecosystem services, which is a mad way of saying we all rely on the environment.
I mean, on the more positive side, would you say, because people like this question of technology, is it technology that ultimately saves us or not? You know, and by persuading big business investment in technology, is that help?
Well, there's a philosophical view as to whether it is. People take different philosophical positions on that one, and my own view is it absolutely. But I think that there will be, in the same way that there are a million different artistic routes to impacting people's views, and different things that work for different people. There needs to be a million different answers, and some of them are sort of very local focused, and some of them are big technology, because the issues are so vast. So I think a million different answers, 100 million different routes.
Marissia, was there something that you wanted to say on this idea of the human or the the anthropocentric?
I've been reading a lot about the Anthropocene, actually, and
which in a way you showed us a graph of, didn't you?
Yes,
I mean, we saw this, the Anthropocene that sort of was dated back to the 1950s, and now they've dated it right back to the 18th century, as you sort of showed us.
Yes.
This moment where humans have actually started affecting the geography and geology of the planet. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So, absolutely, yes, and it's very important to trace it back to the beginnings of industrial revolution and colonialism, because everything is connected. And there's a lot of talk about, so if human beings are like a geophysical force that impact the environment, then there's already a discussion about, we have a non-ontological nature, in a sense. So, post-colonial thinker Chakrabarty is saying we need to reconfigure what the anthropos, the human, is, and see what lies beyond. So, what we understand as human, perhaps we need to kind of reconfigure that and understand what lies beyond the human. That is also part of us, if that makes sense. So, and then the question is, how does that is that communicated through policy making? That's more tricky. I guess art is more an interesting kind of platform to engage with those issues of the human. But I mean that's quite interesting how we try to collapse these binaries that have been haunting us for centuries, nature, culture, nature, human, non-human, and how we can sort of look at these things more holistically and non-hierarchically. Just, I guess, the obvious thing to say, but yeah.
Totally. I was just going to add something about the idea of a theatre without humans. I mean, there are quite a lot of examples. For example, there's
someone who works in Wales, Simon Whitehead, or there's Bryth Gorth, who also worked in Wales, and there are and also Lone Twin, whose work slightly reminds me of what you do actually, who don't necessarily take humans completely out of the equation, but they locate humans in an environment or in a site which is foregrounded as much as the humans are. So I think there are examples of that. But my final kind of question is just asking about other art forms really, because it strikes me that perhaps, you know, poetry, literature, filmmaking might be, or commonly thought of actually as media where it's easier to sort of take the centrality of the human out more than in the case of theatre. But I don't know if you have any particular views on.
Yeah, I kept thinking of Stalker, Tarkovsky, actually, and thinking about how he presented the natural world and really refigured it from the human's perspective, or the viewer's perspective. So, the natural world being discordant, and what that, and it being almost a sentient presence in itself. I just, when you sent those questions, that's really struck me actually. It's a very powerful experience of the natural world having its own life, and humans actually, this idea that we can't exert control over it, or we don't know what's, you know, the relationships are very ambiguous one actually. So I thought that's quite a successful or very opens up space to really contemplate what the natural world's power might be or sense might be.
Well, as it happens, we do have an expert on landscape and film in the room. I won't name any names, but I just wanted to open out the open questions to the floor. If there are anyone, if there's anyone who'd like to ask. Yes.
Yeah. It was because you mentioned about the different art forms, and then I was thinking about going back to the practice and the, you know, ecologically minded in your own practice, which was something we were talking about, and thinking about theatre and film particularly. Traditionally, we thought there's maybe collaborative art, so lots of people, and you going to a festival and you mentioned your carbon footprint, okay, so you go to a festival or having lots of people working on that project, you know, creates this large carbon footprint as opposed to, say, maybe a painter and that kind of thing. So I was thinking about how do you get, you know, Rosalind, your practice that you were doing in the William Morris Gallery, how do you promote that across like the popular mainstream industry, which does have, you know, massive carbon footprint and it's really not very environmentally friendly, like, not that I'm asking you to solve that massive question around Hollywood now, but I just kind of, you know, what you were talking about was really interesting, and then I was thinking about, questions around festivalisation of theatre. I have a colleague who's working about greening music festivals, trying to green them by, you know, getting audiences to recycle and things like that. And of course, the biggest thing with music festivals is the travel to them. You know, so wonder about that.
I mean, God, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to kind of, you know, influence? But I almost feel that, you know, you make your own personal kind of ethical choices about the way you work, and part of the reason that you might choose to work as an artist on a smaller scale and in the way that I work is because actually, you know, you don't buy into the, you know, the value system underlying, you know, massive film productions, or, you know, much as I love, I mean, you know, I love films, so, but you know, I feel more comfortable with working on the scale and in the way that I work, perhaps partly because of the, you know, the waste and all the rest of it. So I think, you know, as an artist, you're sort of resisting kind of mainstream forms of representation in a way through your work, but yeah, it would be nice if some of those ideas filtered through. I don't know who we claim to have much influence.
Yeah, a lot of initiatives in the theatre around sort of try to reduce the carbon footprint. In London there was the Green Initiative, the Green Theatre Initiative that involved a lot of theatres. The Arcola, I know, are really reduce their carbon footprint.
I mean, there must be in film as well. There must be similar. I don't know about it because I'm not involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is the organisations such as Julie's Bicycle that kind of gives you, points for not reducing the carbon footprint of your industry, but your organisation. But I think also the carbon footprint of the theatre is very minimal in comparison to against the large scheme of things. So yes, it's great. It's a symbolic gesture, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. But I think it's very important to look at what happens at the top level, because no matter how much we recycle, it's not going to solve the problem. And I'm not saying that theatre and film will change the world, but perhaps it can do some other work.
Were there other questions, or perhaps there are questions that you would like to ask each other?
I just wanted to, Rosalind, Thomas More's Head's about 2 miles down the road. I don't know if you're aware of that. But,
Okay.
Yeah, talking about Utopia and
I have read that before and then forgotten, but yeah.
Perhaps going down the hill, or keep Ecologies down the hill, or sharing a bus. As you go round about the bottom of the hills, there's Dunstan's Church, and that's where his head is fortunately buried. And just on the left is Anna Roper's Gate, where the Roper family lived. So it's just quite an interesting.
Actually, on the I remember I just was thinking about my seed packet project and people's dreams of a future London, and actually some of those were without humans. So that was quite interesting. So one of them, one person was very keen on an idea of rewilding part of London, so reintroducing animals that once roamed on the reality of this.
I love that there's some great stuff happening.
Wolves in
reintroducing wolves in the Epping Forest and having kind of non-human zones, and apparently wolves and rhino bones and hippo bones have been found on Trafalgar Square, and so apparently they were actually. And then there was a couple of other ideas that were about that humans would eventually have to leave and be on another planet, and then this idea of London going back to, so it's quite a post-apocalyptic kind of scenario. But so in that way, I guess there was something other than human perspectives.
I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but I'm listening to you. I was just thinking about the idea of positive narratives about, what can we do, let's do something about it, and the negative narratives, and the idea that we can't do anything, that it's too big, and especially individually, what can we do to tackle this huge problem. And I've seen quite a few of these productions that you mentioned, and I've also seen 10 billion. Some of you will have seen Katie Mitchell with
Stephen Emmett.
And there's the authority there telling you that there is nothing you can do, right?
Train your children
said,
to use guns was this
Exactly. He says, bottom line, learn to use a gun. There's nothing. Don't try and not fly or whatever, because it's not going to change anything. The thing is, if there's a scientist telling you this, and then other scientists may be telling you different things, but I just as a person that does a moderate amount of things, but I just don't know who to believe, and as someone who's engaging with the arts, in my work, etc. But also as a citizen, as a person, as an individual, navigating these narratives.
Just thinking about 10 billion, I think that was so problematic in so many ways. This was, for people who don't know, this is a Cambridge professor who's a specialist in climate change,
Stephen Emmett, who gave a performance lecture that was kind of animated by Katie Mitchell, who's a well-known director, and there were sort of cartoony type graphics and things. And it was a lecture, yes, about the fact that that the population will be 10 billion by the middle of this century, and what the consequences of that will be. I personally think there's a difference between that, on the one hand, because a scientist has a certain veracity about him. We knew he was a scientist. That on the one hand. And then on the other hand, plays, or perhaps they could be films, which are visibly fictional, and which are post-apocalyptic, and which are showing us what has happened after the devastation has been wrought. And just to give you a bit more context about this play X that Marissia and I both seen and been quite blown away by, it's set on Pluto, where a little population of people who've gone to live on Pluto because the Earth is virtually uninhabitable, and they're no longer receiving any messages from planet Earth, and they have no idea what's happening. And they assume that actually the very last people have died on planet Earth. So all human life has ceased on planet Earth, and they are stuck on Pluto with no hope of being saved. Now, I think the difference with that, with the difference with a fictional form, whether it's a film or whether it's a play or a poem or whatever it is, that it doesn't have a utopian element to it at all, but it's inviting us to imagine what could be otherwise, and how things could be otherwise, and what we could potentially do to stop that happening.
But hearing the
so I think that's where the kind of positive side to it comes. I don't think it's totally, I think when it's in a fictional context, I don't think it's necessarily something which is completely doom-ridden, because it is enabling us as space, as spectators, to try and envisage what we could do.
I think just to finish, you made me think about different audiences there, and thinking about, you're doing counterattacks or, arts engaging audiences, thinking particularly about people not like us who are aware of the issues and want to engage with the issues, but people who really don't want to engage with the issues, and maybe younger audiences as well who aren't as informed. So when you, Nick, pick your artist or commission your artist, are you thinking are you thinking of your different audiences? How does that work? And with your workshops again, the different workshops for different age groups and things like that.
I think in this case we would think about the subject, and also there's a question about Arts Council. We also think about the Arts Council. It strikes me that if the artists are unknown, you're more likely to get a grant. So there's something very tactical about the financial side that must be very difficult to hear. But I'm just trying to, I think with regards to the ASH project, which is about the loss of this tree from our landscapes, I'm trying to play it as tactically as I can to make something happen, because from a cultural perspective, absolutely nothing, or virtually nothing, is happening. And we stand to lose this tree from our landscape. So I just feel, and it's quite personal, although happily in this case it aligns with my professional, I feel there's a really urgent need to do something, or we will, in 15, 20 years' time, look back on the landscapes of Britain and say, do you know, we should have done something to record those trees. We are going to lose them, or the bulk of them. That's what the science tells us. And we do quite a lot of science about it, do nothing culturally. And actually, human at the centre of it, it's the cultural resonances that really matter. And I'm just astonished. I kind of got in touch with all sorts of national organisations about this, and they said, yeah, great idea, Nick, away you go. It's kind of not my job. But so in terms of the choice of the artist, that was, in that case, it was quite tactical. But more widely with that project, because it's not only about those artists, they're kind of a hook to do a whole range of other stuff, and that will be audience specific. It'll be about camera clubs, it'll be about youth groups, it'll be about all sorts of different, so work with drones. We do work at the moment with drones. A bit of tech, brilliant way to get teenagers involved, flying around landscapes with drones, taking pictures as you go, is interpreting the landscape to teenagers. That's working brilliantly at the moment. So so we'll use the techniques, different techniques for different audiences. But at the heart of that project, the agro-hardy thing is the sort of tangible. But I love that practice as well. I always have. So for me, it'd be great if we do get our money. Did that answer? I'm not sure.
That's exactly. So there's a bit of strategic element, but like you said, there's other offshoots that you are, and obviously with sort of arts as well, just different,
absolutely.
Different ways of engaging different audiences. And in this instance, recording as much as like it's already a done deal with the disease, so it's about recording. And is it the same in your workshops around the tax as different audiences? Like,
yes, I mean that's the hope really is about the marketing of that, but really to be able to get as many different people in the room to have as wide a conversation about this topic as possible. And so we can even assess to a certain degree, and it's why the Tyndall Centre are really interested in this from their perspective, so that they can use it as a place to analyse and record for themselves what the responses are from different groups of people. But it's a particular play which is going to attract a particular audience, so that it's already got a kind of limitation on the people that we're going to be engaging with. So that's the test of this production as well, to see who the production attracts, but also who the outreach programme work attracts, because it might be two different groups. So this is really the first exploration of who really we can get in the room. But absolutely ideally, people across section, different demographics,
also in response to your residency, did you like family days?
Mm-hmm. I had to. There was a whole community engagement programme. So yes, there was a family day at the gallery, and there was various things. There was ecological filmmaking workshop where we tried out different formulas for processing film, including using rosemary, tea bags, potatoes, and coffee grains combined with vitamin C and soda crystals, and we got images from all of them, so that was really
which was the best one?
Interesting. I mean, coffee was good and I used that, but if I'd have known, actually we did that some way into residency, if I'd have known I could have used potatoes then, it would have been really interesting to grow that. In fact, I might now be doing some community engagement workshops in Walthamstow through this organisation called Cultivate, where we do actually grow potatoes and then film ourselves, in a workshop, people film each other harvesting the potatoes, and then we juice the potatoes and then we roast them. But yes, lots of in the year I had various drop-in sessions and people could try out different processes, and there's going to be various participatory elements as it moves forward. In fact, some of it's going to be pedal tower projection as well, and so there has been lots of things.
Can I say something in response to that? Actually, I think it's very important to acknowledge also we are an institution, we teach young minds, and I think our sort of pedagogy is also important in shaping new perceptions about what we're talking about today, because we are nurturing young practitioners who go and teach children and all that. So I think we should, just to respond to Margherita's point on the hopeful kind of side of things, I think we have agency to shape the grassroots level, I guess, minds in that way, in any way we can, either as practitioners or teachers. So I think we need to kind of embrace that as well.
Anyone else? With this obviously university thing, wide variety, we were talking about other departments. So in a school like this, do other departments or external come and talk about subjects that you might where do the subjects come from? So you might get, I don't know, someone from the Darwin Institute coming in to talk about Great Western Heat, or someone, Tyndall is UEA, isn't it? So, getting science and arts together could, the university is absolutely the place to do that. Is that what happened?
It could happen a lot more,
Yeah.
but there's certainly increasing initiative for that to happen. Yeah, definitely. For there to be interdisciplinary degree schemes, etc. I mean, there isn't as it stands in drama and theatre. There isn't a module on kind of eco-critical practice and theory, but that's something.
But it just might be a simple. It might not be that. It just might be a simple prompt from another researcher about here's a few hours on what the issues of climate change are. Go on creatives, make something with this. Just I don't know.
Well, in anthropology, we're a big institute of conservation. We look at this. I mean, it's a shame that down here it's very hard to get people working across silos. And I'm speaking as someone who's responsible for research nominally across faculty of humanities, and it's very, very hard to work. Outside that, I did come from an event which Social Sciences are running with humanities just before this, and perhaps some of the people who would come at that event, which is overlapping this, unfortunately. But I mean, the way that Arts Humanities Research Council, which is one of our main academic funders in humanities, their delivery plan, which is published, they're having to respond to new government initiatives, global funds, whatever it's called, which is replacing overseas development. And look through the delivery plan, it's all about climate, it's all about migration, it's all about these kinds of issues. Nothing much at all about art, a little bit about creative industries and economy, but really nothing about arts, pure arts research such is all leading towards the kinds of collaborations which you've been talking about and come into this analysis. So it's just the institutions take a long time to catch up. So the drivers are there, but it will take a while, I think, for that to really filter down. Institutions move like this in this case going very, very slowly, unfortunately. But yeah, students we're teaching will go on to become the lecturers of such these departments, but whether it'll be too late or not, hopefully not.
I was thinking more of practitioners when they go out and the subjects they choose for their art, for their performance.
Any other comments or questions?
It's fantastic session.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're recording it so other people can watch it.
Well, I'm going to say this straight to camera. I think it's time for wine. So can I just really thank very, very heartily our four speakers, Rosalind, Nick, Marissia and Kay, for a really fabulous discussion and really, really inspiring comments and experiences. So thank you very much.
I like that Clare sharing. So